do those all back to back and then kind of have some discussion and, you know, the two kind of questions that we posed are just conversation starters. We can kind of, if you guys have things you want to talk about or questions or just general stuff, and then we can just go from there.
And I apologize, I just realized we were muted for the meeting, so just as a summary for the recording, we started the meeting at 6:30. We have 5 in attendance, there was no one here for public comment, the minutes were approved, and summer schedule was set for July off with August tentatively canceled.
Wow, we did that fast.
We'll go ahead and start with the video.
Take it away.
Just unmuting here. Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Brenda. And also thank you to Senator Couture and Representative Bateman for joining us today. I'm so glad you could be here and for your leadership on housing. Just for a quick note for attendees who are on here who might not have seen Jerry initially. May not know who we are, but Master Builders Association, we are the oldest and largest local home builders association in the country, affiliated with National Association of Home Builders. We represent a whole range of home building and housing professionals, from builders, remodelers, to interior designers and real estate professionals. Next slide. And just a quick note on our mission statement, we are committed to, I wanted to call out, we're committed to ensure all people can attain housing and pledge to make positive impacts through our advocacy, community education, and philanthropic outreach. Also, on that note, pleased to have some of our community partners here with us today, Habitat for Humanity on this panel, and also Housing Development Consortium on the last panel. But on thinking about housing attainability piece of it, that brings us to the next slide and talking about what our agenda was going into session. And so next slide. Here we go. And so, I would say among our members' top priorities are reducing long permit timelines and streamlining duplicative, costly reviews that are triggered by SEPA. And so the first two items on this slide really reflect the process oriented and kind of hit on some of the things that Clay highlighted in his presentation in the last panel. This is so important because when it's not done right, the permit process and project reviews can add significant time and cost to new home construction. This ultimately makes housing more expensive and less attainable. So definitely a concern for our members. We're hearing it more and more. And actually, Senator Couture's committee held a work session on addressing this topic last year, and want to thank Senator for inviting our members to testify. Something we're going to continue to work on, at state level and local level. We have also been very strong advocates for the middle housing bills discussed here today, and thank you, Representative Bateman, for your sponsorship and leadership on that topic, and also facilitating ADUs. So those are the next two items on the list. It's just absolutely critical that we enable more housing choices so more people can find a home that best fits their lives. This is especially important, in light of our limited footprint on which we have to build within urban growth boundaries, and also the relatively high percentage of land currently dedicated to single detached housing in any given city. It's not the only solution, but it definitely has to be part of it. And so, that's definitely part of our agenda. And other items are on our agenda going into session: delaying future energy code changes. What we're finding is very problematic when these costly code updates come online. And we don't have the access to the materials or supplies in order to meet the new codes, and we really just need more time to ramp up going forward to make sure that it's successful. And then finally, we've not talked much about the labor shortage issue today, but really when I hit on this, it's a major concern for our members, impacting the cost of projects. But so really, we're looking for ways to expand graduation pathways into the trades. This is something that has long been on our agenda. We're going to continue to talk about it, but definitely a priority for us. So how did we fare? Next slide. So here we go. So as you can see, most of our agenda at the outset of session did not make it across the finish line in the short session. In addition to the middle housing bills, we've been discussing bills that would have addressed long permit timelines, and a good SEPA reform bill by Representative Barkas failed to pass this year, along with other bills on our agenda shown here. But we were pleased to see the passage of 5818 by Senator Solomon and that Senator Kuderer touched on earlier. This bill had strong bipartisan support. This was one of the SEPA reform bills. It would exempt certain actions by cities to increase housing capacity from review and appeal under the Growth Management Act and SEPA. And what this will do is help local governments to more easily plan for measures promoting housing, saving time and money from added SEPA review. So in fact, this bill was just signed into law yesterday. So we were happy to see that across the line. And while we were sad to not see middle housing bill pass, there was some funding in the budget for some grants. 7.5 million that would help GMA planning cities who adopt ordinances that would authorize middle housing types on at least 30% of lots currently zoned for single family. So that's what happened. But the next part of the equation we're being asked to talk about, or kind of what are the hurdles and where we go for here. So next slide. I would submit one of the biggest hurdles to adopting positive bills is that local resistance to change. And Chad touched on this, you call it the fear of change. You mentioned it on the first panel, and I concur. Honestly, I look at this as what we need to do a better job of sharing the perspectives of those who aren't able to access housing. Because right now we know the voices of local residents who already live here or are well established in their homes. Are clearly being heard, but thinking about renters or maybe someone hoping to get into their first home, and just all the challenges they and someone pointed this out to me on a webinar earlier this week. They're not an organized voice per se, and so hard to be heard. Next slide. Unfortunately, though, there's no shortage of arguments opponents use to convince local governments they should adopt more restrictive regulations, maintain exclusive zoning, and make it nearly impossible to bring attainable housing to market. And yet the great need for more housing persists. There are no easy answers, but I would just put out a reminder that cities do have the ability to make changes now. So even in the absence of state legislation, which we've been discussing, they can act on the problems I've described. Next slide. And so that's why we created a housing toolkit to provide concrete ways cities can update their codes to improve permit timelines, streamline the building process, and enable more housing choices. And I will put links to this in the chat after I'm done here, but also to help provide a positive view of what more housing choices looks like. We've created our Housing Choices for Everyone video series. And again, I'll put links in the chat for you to check those out as well. And that's all I have. I would like to
Did you guys want to talk in between each video about what you just saw, or do you want to wait till the end and have a long conversation?
Either way.
Any concepts in there that didn't sound familiar, or acronyms or whatever?
Okay.
Differences in different organizations' bills, we all have that same goal of how do we get more housing for more people. And with that, I'm going to have Ryan Donahue, who is Advocacy and Policy Director at Habitat for Humanity, Seattle, King, and Kittitas counties, talk about some of the solutions.
Getting that feedback, and I thought it was a baby at first, like in one of the people, and I went,
Primary recording or is it?
I don't remember it.
I don't think so.
Yeah,
I mean, it wasn't the first time I listened to it,
Yeah.
so.
Try a fresh one.
I mean, well, it could be because it's going through.
Yeah,
It could be.
we didn't have this last time, and I remember.
The last time I think we could do it last time.
Yeah, last time we couldn't, I just played it directly to the TV.
Yeah.
Solutions that and some of the work that he's doing to raise awareness for the affordable housing crisis. So
Sure.
with that, Ryan, take it away.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Brenda. I want to start off really just by thanking all of you at the MBA, as well as everybody on this panel, for allowing me to be a part of this powerhouse group of folks here. Honestly, I'm a little bit in awe of being able to be a part of this opportunity. I also, so I want to kind of just go into a little bit about what we have done and what we've been working on, particularly over the last year. But a lot of what I would have mentioned, is particularly in the victory section, was actually already mentioned. So I was kind of thinking, as I was listening to Senator Kuderer, that I was putting check marks next to my list of, oh yeah, no, we supported that, we supported that, we supported that. So we were really glad to see the things that did make its way through. A couple things I would highlight of the bills that were mentioned already. First off, it cannot be understated just how important the budget in particular, and the capital budget that was passed this year, is going to have an impact on housing affordability as a whole, and on homeownership specifically. This biennium, we've seen record investments, like unprecedented investments, like honestly generational level investments in affordable housing of all types. And I do want to make sure that everybody in this room knows just how important that was. Because not only did we end up seeing over $700 million in overall affordable housing funding across a wide variety of pools, another one of the things that it did include is a record level of investment in affordable home ownership funding, which previous to this year, the high watermark had been 5 million. This year, the legislature allocated 25 million to home ownership, which honestly is a huge deal. And I know we're really, really excited to be able to have that be the case. A couple other things that I would mention, as Senator Kuderer mentioned, also the bond cap measure, the Housing Finance Commission bond cap measure passed, which was also a huge deal. The reality is, if that wouldn't have been lifted or raised, we would have serious problems. Us at Habitat, as well as any number of both for-profit and nonprofit developers across the state, would have had a harder time being able to build homes. So the fact that we were able to do that is a big deal. Also, as Senator Kuderer mentioned, the REIT bill from Representative Hackney, that'd be 1643. That's going to be able to allow groups like Habitat, groups like other nonprofit housing developers, governmental entities, housing authorities, that kind of entity, be able to actually compete for land with for-profit developers in a way that makes it so we may be able to take some of that available land, and actually put affordable housing there, whether it's affordable home ownership or other types of affordable housing. That's crucial. We need to be able to do that, because if we continue to simply be, as a nonprofit, if we continue to be dependent on getting land essentially donated to us, the realistic thing is we're not going to be able to build enough. So what we need to be able to do is compete in that marketplace. And this is one of those things that's going to be able to help let us and actually equip us to do that at a appropriate level. But as I believe a lot of other folks also mentioned, on the policy front, it was less successful of a year than we would have liked. A couple things that I would highlight. Obviously, I think the zoning effort is a big thing. I want to take a quick moment to shout out the wide range of folks that were there with us trying to promote and really pushing for, in particular, Representative Bateman, your bill, as well as the Senator Doss bill that Senator Couture, you were a co-sponsor on. That bill would have been a game changer and would have made a huge difference. And, whether, between groups like AARP, us at Habitat, Sightline, Sierra Club, HDC, MBAX, Realtors, Department of Commerce, so many other folks that were there. I just probably listed a 20th of the amount of groups that were there in strong support of that piece of legislation. And unfortunately that we weren't able to cross the finish line there. I can tell you that us at Habitat, we're not going to take that sitting down. We're coming back, and we're coming back strong. And I think the important thing that I would note, especially as it relates to zoning and also the ADU bill that was mentioned from Representative Shoemake, these are things that are desperately needed. There are two things, as I've told many people, and probably a number of folks on this call have heard me say at one point in time or another, that we can make all the changes we want on the edges when it comes to building more housing. But if we don't address two things when it comes to affordable housing, we're never going to solve the crisis. One is more subsidy for affordable housing. We did a great job on that this year, and we're incredibly proud and incredibly thankful to the legislature for doing that. That's one piece of the puzzle, though. That alone won't get the job done. We also need to be able to relax our zoning codes and really tear down the exclusionary zoning policies that we have in place, because we need to make it so we can build more homes in more places of more types for more people. And if we can't do that, all the money in the world isn't going to solve this problem. So we want to make sure, I know that we're going to be strongly involved in this effort and really pushing on that, as well as we can go into next year. And if we have to, the year after that, and if we have to, the year after that, we're not going away. And I want to make sure that everybody here in this call knows it. One other bill that we did unfortunately not get through the finish line, and this admittedly was a little bit frustrating on our end, was actually a fairly small and little noticed bill that would have allowed for more affordable or would have actually allowed for home repair programs to move forward, particularly in rural communities. That was HB 2098, also actually by Representative Shoemake. And the problem there is in rural communities, we serve Kittitas County as one of those areas. And what we found out there is oftentimes there are a lot of people who are having to decide between staying in their home and finding a way to pay for the leaky roof that they have, or being forced to leave their home because it's not inhabitable anymore. What we need to be doing is being able to help allow, and there is a program that exists that helps keep people in their homes. The problem is, unlike almost any other program that's run in the repair or on home repair efforts, it's tied to interest rates, and it has a higher interest rate than anything else. And now, because interest rates are going up dramatically, there are homeowners all of a sudden that desperately need the repair services that won't be able to get it now because that bill didn't pass. That would have capped interest rates at 1.5% for these loans that are being issued. We're hoping that that can be addressed as we move into next year, and that's something we're going to be working on. But a lot of us, I know I kind of put in a lot of downer, and I believe a lot of us also talked a bit about some of the down things, but I do want to emphasize just how successful and how there's really reasons for optimism. You know, we talked about the zoning bill, and yeah, we didn't get it over the finish line, but we got farther than I think we've ever gotten before on this issue. And that's important to point out, and that's important to celebrate, because we need to keep going, and we're going to keep going, but this is a step in the right direction. So we just need to keep up the pressure and keep moving forward. You know, sadly, the repair program that I just mentioned, that bill did not pass. But one of the things that we're looking forward to is this will give us an opportunity to try and make more reforms and make it better, so that, you know, when we come back to it next year, that we can hopefully help improve that bill and make it even better going into the next year and make it a more effective program. There are some other things that I want to note. One is that housing trust fund reforms, I know it's likely on the table for next year. As an affordable housing developer ourselves, the Housing Trust Fund and the Department of Commerce in particular has a huge role to play when it comes to funding affordable housing options and helping to develop those. And the work that is done there, and the Housing Trust Fund in particular, is an incredibly important tool. And we want to try and see what tweaks we can do to make it better and make it more equitable to be able to serve everybody. The last thing I do want to mention as far as reasons for optimism goes, though, is we as a affordable housing community, and really as a housing development community, I believe have been focusing more and more on trying to find or trying to address this in an equitable way. And I think that's incredibly important to point out. You know, I can't even name the number. I'm not sure I can even list all of the different groups that either Habitat is a part of, or Master Builders is a part of, or both of us are a part of in a number of these groups that are focused explicitly on trying to address the racial homeownership gap and the racial housing gap as a whole, and trying to address that affordable housing effort, whether it's at the local level, county level, state level. I know we're all a part of those things. I mean, us at Habitat, we've been very heavily involved in a lot of those efforts, obviously. You know, I'm sure most of you all know who Habitat is and what we do. I realize I didn't mention any of that. I sure hope everybody knows. But one of the things that we are, you know, that we're proud of is that the communities we serve are primarily people of color. Roughly 66% of all of our homeowners are people of color. In fact, 33% of them are actually Black, less than, it's, I believe, 31% white. So we understand the importance of working with BIPOC communities, and we're continuing to do that. And we love the fact that there's so much attention and effort being paid to trying to really address that issue, because that's another one of those crucial issues that we need to be doing as we're moving forward on this work. So that's really all I kind of wanted to mention. And just, again, thank you for all the opportunities. I'll go ahead and put in the chat, assuming I'm allowed to, I'm not really able to do that quite yet. As soon as I can, I will send a message that will let you know how you can sign up for Habitat's advocacy alerts, which is really easy, and you can be a part of the work we're doing, and also provide some email contacts for me as well if you wanted to reach out directly to the work that we're doing at Habitat.
Brian, thank you very much. This is the first day I've met you, but I absolutely can tell you I love your knowledge and passion. A great presentation. We've got time for just a few questions, and I'm going to start it off. When it comes to housing policy and the issue of local control, we've heard a lot of times, let's just let the cities take care of it. What do you think is the right balance between state versus local in setting policy direction, and how do we achieve that? And I think we'll ask our legislators to address that first, and then if any of the rest of our panel want to weigh in.
All right, well, I'll start. Thank you, Brenda. It's an excellent question. And it is definitely caused a lot of friction. The Association of Washington Cities, I can tell you that all the cities are not on the same page. Mike, you know that Kirkland has been very proactive in developing affordable housing. They are, in my opinion, the gold standard in terms of what they are doing. And I very much appreciate working with them, and they have provided some very helpful input and insight into the policy that we ultimately pass at the state level. But I do think that what we need is a floor. We need a floor for all communities to put into place to implement. And then we should allow for flexibility within the communities to expand on that floor. how they feel that their communities would benefit from best. And this is not an easy task. As you know, these bills are extremely controversial when they get into committee hearings. We have hundreds of people signed up to testify on these bills, and Ryan has been there many times. He can testify to that, and so have many city officials. And I understand the desire for local control, but when that prevents us from having the amount of affordable housing that we need, when that prevents workers from being able to live in their communities, when it creates housing bubbles, it's really, really critical that the state step in and set some minimum standards. I will be in conversation with cities this interim about this very issue. The ADU bill, the ADU bills, I should say, Rep. Bateman's would have been transformational if we would have been able to get that passed. Representative Shoemake's bill was, sort of Rep. Bateman's bill light, but it also would have done, it would have helped move us forward the way we need to. We need to be able to leverage our existing infrastructure to the best opportunities that we can. And we did allocate nearly $250,000 to rapid acquisition of housing for local governments to help them with creating permanent supportive housing for homeless populations that they have in their communities. And these are our neighbors and our friends and people that, fell down on their luck and are no longer living in a home. And I know that Kirkland has been also, again, a leader in this area in terms of creating opportunities for people who don't have a roof over their heads to come in from outside on the street. And so these two go hand in hand. The lack of housing opportunities, it is interrelated with our homelessness issue overall. And so we have to be working on multiple fronts to deal with this. And so I hope that answered your question, Brenda, but I feel very strongly that we need to be moving forward with a floor for the entire state.
Representative Bateman, do you want to weigh in on this?
I would love to. Had this conversation for 60 days. So I think I agree with Senator Cooter, and actually the National League of Cities, which is the statewide association of cities representing them across the country, agrees as well. They support a statewide floor for housing density. And then beyond that, cities can tailor their local zoning and densities according to their values and their needs and what their composition of their city looks like. I agree, not every city looks the same, and they should be able to make those tweaks for themselves depending upon their community. But we have to have a floor. That is the new best practice. That is the future. That's the policy of the future. If you disagree with that, I mean, if you believe that what we currently have is working, if you believe that, 15, 20% home price increases year over year, where only 7 counties in Washington state have housing that's affordable for first-time homeowners, where half of renters are spending 1/3 to 50% of their income on their housing costs. Those are not realities that are equitable or sustainable or healthy for our communities. There's also an interconnection between housing and where we live and health, overall health. And I serve on the healthcare committee, and on my day job, I work in health. I really do think that the intersection of housing impacts so many things about people's lives, like I mentioned with climate change. The AWC, the Statewide Association for Cities, has been opposed to legalizing missing middle housing for years. They again reiterated that opposition this year. It's not surprising. Cities have had their ability to maintain local control for decades. They want to keep that. And I understand that natural human response to the state coming in, and we can have those arguments back and forth, but I think right now with the crisis that we're in, it really does require a statewide lift and floor for housing, so we can have a diffuse absorption of that population across the state. And then of course, we're going to have higher densities in high opportunity areas and areas where there's closer to transit, where There's more retail, our downtowns, et cetera. And I think I appreciate what Ryan mentioned earlier. We did have the strongest coalition we have ever had, and Senator Doss in the Senate was the champion over there. And she's in fact sponsored this bill a number of times. And I know this is at the core of her values. And fortunately, we got in the House Local Government Committee, we had over 500 people signing in pro when this bill was heard. The coalition that we brought forward included organizations like the AARP, Habitat, Sightline, Climate Solutions, Master Builders, Builders Association. I mean, you name it, we had everyone at the table. But then on the other side, it was just really one organization that was opposed, talking about local control. I think the one size fits all approach that we've been deploying for decades isn't working, and our constituents demand a solution. And we're going to have to keep working at it. I'll bring this bill back next year, and I'm going to come back with a stronger coalition. I'll work with Senator Couderer to talk with our local governments. Kirkland was supportive of that bill in its original form. I think it changed and they had some different feelings about it after it got amended. But we had a lot of cities that actually were supportive, and I think we'll see even more. So we're going to work on that. We'll keep at it, and we'll keep asking constituents to ask their legislators what their position is on this issue.
4 more minutes.
Any questions before we go to the next video?
And this is Kirkland, the infamous Kirkland I all like so much. Just saying a few remarks, but he spoke in some other areas too.
Something that I've been part of my entire career in a multi-generational capacity. I believe it's the nexus.
Zoning changes and doing
kind of originates out of our place of residence. So it's just a real, in my mind, maybe it's too lofty a term, but it's a soulful work that we're engaged in housing and trying to provide enough housing choices to accommodate people at all income levels. So I find it incredibly exciting and rewarding and fulfilling.
Thank you, Aaron. Adam, Kirkland's been experiencing zoning changes and implementing middle housing code changes. How is this going, and how do you think what's happening, and what do you suggest for everybody?
There's a lot of questions in one question, but
Yes.
I'll try to tackle them relatively quickly. The city, for a long time in Kirkland, we've had missing middle housing regulations, actually adopted as early as 2005, but they were very, very restrictive. They allowed duplexes and triplexes and cottages in some zones, some single family zones, but not others. They the rules limited square footage. A lot of parking requirements were added to your permit approval process. And so what we did starting in 2018, 2019 is we really tried to peel off all of the barriers that were preventing the construction of duplexes and triplexes and cottages in Kirkland. And so we really just tried to come up with a list of everything that was making it more difficult to build these housing units in Kirkland, and just try to take them away. And so in March of 2020, City Council adopted a very comprehensive set of amendments to our existing missing middle housing rules that very much align actually with 1782 that Representative Bateman was talking about. So we allowed missing middle housing types in all single family zones across the city. We did away with minimum lot size or minimum unit sizes or maximum unit sizes. So you could build them as big as you wanted to, as long as they didn't exceed the footprint of a regular single family house. We allowed them to be built at twice the density for a single family house. We really streamlined the permitting process so that you only need to come in for a building permit to build duplexes and triplexes and cottages. We really did away with parking requirements. You have to build 1 parking space per unit, generally speaking. Also, the other thing that we did is that we allowed accessory dwelling units to be built as part of missing middle housing types. And then we also established density minimums in our medium and high density residential districts. What we found was that people were building single family housing in our zoning districts that were designated for multifamily development. And so now if you're building in those zoning districts, you have to build at 80% of the minimum. So I think that's what we did. That's what City Council did in 2020. In terms of how it's working, that's a really interesting question because the amendments were adopted in March of 2020, and we all know what happened in February of 2020, right? There was COVID and supply chain issues and worker shortages and so forth. But just as a sort of a snapshot of what's happened in between March of 2018 and February of 2019, we received permits totaling 6 units for cottages in Kirkland. So six cottage units in 1 year. In just the first 6 months of this year, the first 6 months of 2021, we received permits totaling 71 units for cottages. So I think there's a potential there to get some interest in missing middle housing. Not as many duplexes and triplexes, but we're seeing some promising numbers for cottages and then also ADUs.
Great. Thank you, Adam.
Is there anything anybody else watched in the green that, or anybody has a desire to look at?
I think that might be useful. I can share my screen and show some of the missing middle typologies that we showed at the planning commission earlier when we were considering the MDRs, just so you guys understand what we're talking about now. Okay. Share my screen. Oh, okay. Yeah.
I was wondering if the city of Arlington is that like a sister city to North Bend, or why Arlington?
Oh, I think probably just size wise is why it's given as an example.
You mentioned also about Skamania, but I think you didn't include Skamania, right?
Skamania?
Yeah.
Did I?
You mentioned here. Regional NA. HNA prepared by for Skamania County. Yeah.
Okay.
Both are from Arlington.
Yeah, I'll look back and see if I got that.
Arlington is like north, near
Right.
Layla, right?
Right.
How big is Arlington compared to?
Let me look. Yeah. They are, yeah, they're 22,000. Wait, is that Arlington?
Yeah, that's right.
Washington, yeah, yep. Yeah, a lot bigger than I thought.
So you heard a lot about missing middle or medium residential. And the idea there is there's historically we built a lot of standard single family homes since World War II. Before World War II, there was a lot of housing typologies that weren't your standard single family or standard multifamily. So when we think of multifamily, we often think of the big garden apartment complexes where you've got huge rows upon rows of large 3-4 story buildings that have big, large blank walls, lots of carports, kind of intimidating. So what this missing middle typology does is it breaks that down into a smaller scale that fits in naturally with single family homes. So if you look at this is over in Redmond, just an example neighborhood. All of these homes are 3-unit homes, but they still look like just big standard single family. And it's built in the context of a standard single family neighborhood with alleys in the back, typical front yards. It feels spacious, feels comfortable, but the housing density this is probably about 12 to 16 units per acre. So it's pretty impressive.
Were
Sorry,
those,
this is
were
a-
those triplexes or?
Yeah,
Probably 2 at the front and 1 at the rear then.
I'm just skipping down through some of this. We were looking at what areas the city could allow some of this. So yeah, that's 15 units per acre there. But it feels like what North Bend would feel like with 4 units per acre. This is not the same slide. So we have some examples of this in North Bend already, and some of them predate World War II. So missing middle is a kind of a term that was coined by Opticos Design, where they researched a lot of these old homes and recognized that they're not being built anymore. But we do have some examples in Northville. And you can see on 2nd Street and 3rd Street, kind of over by QFC, we have a changing neighborhood. So that's within our downtown commercial zone. And as we transition and allow these housing types, it's becoming actually popular. And we're seeing a lot of conversion from older single family homes that are being taken down and they're replaced with slightly larger duplexes. So each of these are a duplex as an example, but they don't look like a conventional duplex with a mirror right down the side, garages on each side. These are back-to-back duplexes. So it looks like a conventional single family. You get a bigger porch, you get a bigger frontage. Any more examples? This one's a fourplex. This is over on Sydney Avenue. But if you look at it from the front, again, this is pre-World War II. It looks like a conventional single family home, but if you see the side of it, it's quite a bit bigger. And it just fits right within the context of a normal neighborhood. And the cottages, you guys are familiar with that. There's some 1960s examples of just courtyard apartments, which also fit that type of. So some examples that we have from the 80s are not so great, and it relates more to design than typology. So here the parking is just too dominant. Right next to all those. But that just gives you an idea of what we're talking about there.
Questions, considerations, discussions?
What was the bill that related to ADUs? Say that again.
Yeah, it had a lot of little, from what I remember, a lot of different requirements, including things like removing owner occupancy requirements.
Allowing 2, maybe on a
You know,
parcel.
you could limit to 2.
Streamline permitting, so I think there was a number of ADU bills, or more than one, and then I think Seattle talked about what they've done, and some of the cities already had ones approved, so right now we do allow for ADUs, we do say it should be owner occupied, that's very hard to regulate, or impossible,
We're a little ahead of the great game though, and we've allowed ADUs for about 10 years. A lot of jurisdictions still don't allow them.
I just didn't realize it was something that was subject to state law. I would have thought it would.
Well, what they're trying to do is say all cities have to allow it.
should offer it.
Or cities can't limit it, but I think a lot of it had, you can't limit it to owner occupancy.
Yeah.
Or you can't, or you have to make these exceptions to owner occupancy, because one of them had an exception process that if it was, you can require owner occupancy, but you had to give an exception for someone in the military. Because if
I see.
they wanna, then they couldn't own their home anymore all of a sudden, if they had an ADU on it. And so they, some of the different laws had different ways that the city restricted the cities from regulating it a certain way or prohibiting it kind of thing. But we allow it, so it wasn't, the only change, when I looked at a lot of those laws, if they pass, I think the only change we would have had to do is change our owner requirement.
And we do have, we say 800 square feet, 1 bedroom. And some people have wanted larger, I don't know if 800 is the magic number, or even 1 bedroom is the magic number. So we're thinking about that with our definitions. Should we be more lenient because you can get the same, you're still getting an extra unit, and would that be better than 2 on a lot? And, it doesn't matter if the lots were large versus small, so there's a lot of different factors. The other thing that's come up is like, if it's in a neighborhood with the homeowners association, they might have covenants that say you can't.
Other states have restricted HOAs from restricting that as well. So that's something that any EU requirement could, state law could do, is say that, CCRs don't override state law, so therefore we allow, you have to be able to put an ADU.
Okay. And so those City of Arlington documents, were those developed by a consultant? Is that how those came about? And is that something that we're?
Yeah, so the consultant that we have under contract to work on our valley-wide one and then our city-specific provided those examples. So those are ones they want on our housing.
Then our piece in helping facilitate that document, are we providing them as a commission, are we providing them with certain goals or directives or information up front, or are they coming to us with a bunch of ideas and we're trying to distill down what we think might be helpful for the city?
So for the housing needs assessment, there's not really a public participation, because that's just a data determination of what our housing needs are. Once we get to the housing action plan, there will be different public and commission workshops with the consultant to discuss what our needs are, how we might need those needs, and things like that, and ideas.
But we get the.
Because the goals are to meet our needs, so the housing needs.
Exactly, we
So-
need to know what our needs are.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we get the data first and then.
And then we go into the second part of the process, which is the housing action plan, which has more of those policies and ideas and how we can
Okay,
meet our housing needs.
that's super.
Yeah, and you guys can help draft policy. I mean,
Yeah.
literally, we can do, you know, cut red lines and do
Yeah.
that here. And, yeah, there'll be a recommendation. It'll be similar to the transportation element. You kind of got the introduction and then they're gonna come back and talk more detail.
And do these consultants, are they addressing issues that were brought up, such as, for example, policies that help address the race gap in homeownership and that sort of thing, or are they, is that sort of what they're looking at?
So there is a new law that did pass, which is HB 1220, that does require us to look at racially disparate impacts.
Okay,
We don't know what that guidance is gonna be. They are going to be amending the code on housing needs assessments. We don't know. We may have to go back and amend our housing needs assessment if the policy guideline, if what we guess they need to cover does it, and it changes, because we don't know what those requirements are gonna be yet. So we're some of these laws have passed too close to our comp plan, so it's making it very hard to be cities that are planning ahead and getting stuff done in preparation for it. If they put new laws in place and we didn't do that new law, then they're not gonna certify our document, kind of thing. So
Right.
we're kind of in a weird chicken and egg thing where we gotta get it done to keep going. And we also have a grant for it, so we're gonna have the state pay for it, we gotta keep it going.
yeah,
But we don't know what some of those requirements are gonna be that did pass. So they are aware of HB 1220, and they are aware that we need to consider it, we just don't know, we're gonna hope that our consideration will be sufficient. But we don't know what those requirements will be until they release them.
okay. Yeah, it's really helpful to me in, like, you know, because in each of these meetings, we're kind of down in the weeds. And for me, the way that I process information, it's helpful for me to have like a big picture view of, okay, what are we trying to accomplish with this? Before I get down, like drill down to the details, so that's why I'm asking all these questions. I wanna know like what the process is and where we're trying to end up, so that I can focus like on what I'm supposed to do with this.
What we're supposed to do with this information is knowledge, it's it's a base of knowledge, so that when we bring things to you, you've got that base of knowledge to make those decisions and those recommendations. There's not necessarily, your guys' job is to make those policy recommendations to council.
Right.
So whether it's about, we're gonna bring the whole comp plan around, so you've got housing, you've got land use, you've got transportation. So all of those are, you're gonna take in your experience here in the city as well as your knowledge that we're hoping to give you and make those recommendations.
Okay, awesome.
And King County has their comprehensive plan and they have their policies, their
Yeah,
county
And we have to
planning
comply with
policies.
their policies.
Yeah, we have to comply with theirs as well.
We have to comply with the county, the state,
Yeah.
PSRC, like, there's a whole bunch of different organizations that put out requirements for our comprehensive plan and targets.
But these consultants do work with a number of cities and they're familiar with the county policies. And if you start looking at different cities, they start to, a lot of them look the same, certain policies, like you're gonna see this policy and then it might have 2 different words, but it's predictable, in some ways what you're gonna see. And then we tailor it from there,
Okay, okay.
yeah.
Yeah, I sort of fell down the rabbit hole after that workshop of like, there's so many documents out there that you can look at and read, and then I started getting really overwhelmed.
And just this one topic on affordable housing is like, I mean,
It's huge.
for a year, I've been spending, 8 hours a month on meetings, regional meetings, and it just like makes your head wanna blow up, and that's one thing, one topic, so it's big.
And then I hear the update from their meetings at my meetings, and I'm like, what are they doing?
Yeah, I got to hear Matthew Desmond speak several years ago. He wrote Evicted. Oh my gosh, amazing. But not a lot of answers, like a really good description of the problem, but not any solutions.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of these, there's a lot of, books that pop up over and over again in some of my, webinars and things, and one of them is called Missing Middle Housing, Thinking Big. Another one is the color of law, I believe is what it's called, and that talks about redlining and how we got to the situation we're in.
Yeah, if you go to
Thinking
that
Big is small.
missing middle housing website, that's really good.
Okay.
It talks,
Okay,
it's
yeah.
not just about the typologies, but about a lot of the underlying issues that we're talking about, and breaks it down in very simple language.
Oh, God.
Easy to digest.
There's just so much to it.
There's
so much behind it.
I mean, what the laws, what they're trying to push is basically no single family zoning. Basically requiring duplexes or triplexes in all zones, basically.
Which doesn't necessarily mean you have to build it.
Correct.
It's enabled.
But we have to allow it. A few things with that law is our city would have been exempt because we didn't meet the minimum population to be required, but that doesn't mean we wouldn't get there. Another issue that I had with it, the biggest issue I had with it in opposed to regulation, is that they were carving out HOAs. And if you're gonna do it, you need to do it everywhere. And it's not fair, I feel like that creates more displacement issues, more separation issues. If you don't wanna fight the lobby of the HOAs and allow it there too. So that's why that's what I told our, representatives, is I oppose this bill. Even though it wouldn't even affect us, because you gotta do it, if you're gonna do it, and you're gonna make it a state minimum, then it has to apply to everyone in this thing. HOAs at CCNRs cannot prevent the same thing that would happen where there's no HOA, because that just, again, creates more division within a city. And so that was my biggest issue with the bill. Everyone, and what my job also is to convey our council, which is local control, so we, generally, you don't wanna lose local control especially when there's cities, cities that need, a lot of cities feel that having just a base minimum isn't necessarily fair because some cities already have it. I felt more an average made more sense, instead of putting a base minimum that a duplex or triplex has to be allowed in why not say every city has to have a minimum density of allowed, and that way you can still have your rural density in some areas of your city, your single family in some, but it might mean you have your higher densities or higher density.
Yeah.
So that you could still have local control of the different areas of the city, and that was my other issue with the bill, is I feel like an average density makes more sense than a minimum allowance, because there's hillsides, you don't wanna put triplexes on hillsides necessarily. You wanna have some restricted or, low density sometimes, or very rural density, or a state density if it's better for the environment to do that. And so that's where my issue also with a minimum is, I'd rather see an average so that each city can plan where the densities make the most sense.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking when I was watching this, a few points were that, you know, overall, a lot of the cities, including us, are not meeting like that 0 to 30% AMI, really low income, but we're actually, and you'll see these numbers with our housing analysis, is in the 30 to 50 and 50 to 80, like we have a decent stock, we've got all these new
In
apartments.
comparison to the other cities, we're
We're not
so
horrible.
Yeah.
And, you know.
We're not meeting our need, no city was there.
Yeah.
We don't have enough housing, period.
We need some housing here, that's the only way it will happen, dollars brought in from outside, because the city can't do it, and, but because of our new projects we've had, 400 and some units under construction right now, when they talk about, giving a floor and then letting the cities kind of decide where to go from there, I think it's gonna get a lot further than, than saying you have to, do this in all zones, and, again, because if you identify your gaps, and I think that's the point of these housing exercises is, we have a plan and we're gonna try to get it. Now, we can plan all we want, but we can't make people build something. So, we can say, this would be a good spot to intensify or have middle housing, but that's all we can do.
And that's my other issue with these laws that they're pushing right now, is that this housing needs assessment is a new requirement for this comp plan round. They're not even letting us get through a housing needs assessment and housing action plan and make our city individually better and seeing the results. They're wanting to intervene before we let the rest of the law work through its process and let us plan for our housing needs through the housing action plan. Because the last time around, we weren't required to do a housing needs assessment. This time around, we are. So that, part of those requirements, I think, that's what I feel is hard is, okay, you're trying to rush all these requirements through before we do our, comp plan, or you wanna change all of these requirements to meet the needs, but we haven't even finished the process of the comp plan to do our housing needs assessment and our policies to meet those housing needs in the first place. So,
There's panic, because
Yes.
we're getting behind every day, more and more behind
Yes.
every day, it's like, budget's out of whack, it's like, it's kind of that mentality, and there's panic, because they feel, that if it's not,
if they get more
required, yeah, it's not gonna happen, but they're coming around to just more units, period, like we talked about before, I think, is just getting more units, no matter what, more units is good, because we have such a deficiency. And that's where, where you see the mass transit going in and those big buildings going in with tons of units, those are all units, so.
And part of that process too is just streamlining our own regulations in the process so that you can get development happening faster. Because it can take a couple of years for a subdivision to get through the process, which just slows down the production down.
Yeah, and I'm no expert, but that seemed to me like, because we talked about that at the EDC right before I came over here. And that seems to me like it should be priority number one, because it's something we have control over, and it hopefully won't be too costly or burdensome to do. So.
Yeah, we are gonna be bringing you guys probably in the next 6 months, SEPA changes that we want to make to the code that they mentioned. So higher thresholds where we can. What you're gonna run into is staffing, just capacity. We're pretty well staffed here at the city, but other cities are not, and so they just don't have the people to do the processing. But yeah, any ways that we can streamline our code would be good for us too.
So in terms of like costs and staffing, I read the state revenue projections that came out for June, and state revenues are way higher than projected due to retail tax. And I know that the North Bend General Fund is primarily funded by retail tax. Does that necessarily mean that North Bend General Fund revenues are ahead of projections?
So almost always our finance department is conservative projection. So almost always we're gonna be ahead of our projections because we never want to over project.
Sure.
So that's a hard question to answer, because the answer is probably yes. We're gonna be over our projections because we're always very conservative. I can tell you at the first quarter numbers, our development numbers are way low for our projection. But that's also, my guess is by now, it's evened out because we've got so many permits pulled for our multifamily projects. And so, you know, what we predicted for the year, they kind of divided it by 4 and said, okay, this is what you should have for the first quarter, this is what you, well, no, we expect these developments to start this year. That doesn't mean they're starting evenly throughout the year. So I do know, looking at my numbers, and when I was brought the quarterly numbers, my department's, you know, numbers on impact fees, on billing and all of that is low. But that doesn't mean that we won't get there by the end of the year, now that we've got a bunch of impact fees coming into these multifamily projects.
Yeah.
Things like that. So, so yes, we're always going to be probably revenue higher than we project, because we want to be conservative, we don't want to spend more than we end up making. But what the difference is, you know, we find out, you know, when they take to council kind of the, you know, 6-month adjustment, you will see if there's.
I just
revenue
think
change.
it's way more than what you
I don't
expect.
know, because I'm not the finance department, I haven't heard any.
Yeah,
rumblings of-
make
any rumblings of, oh my gosh, we got a whole bunch of extra money, what are we gonna do, you know,
Yeah.
what can we do with it?
I mean, there's been quite a few new hires, and that's a good sign.
Yeah.
Not a new planner yet, but new hires in other areas.
Yeah, but those were all in the original budget.
Yeah, so it's, yeah, but we're holding, and yeah.
And the other thing was, I looked at the 2018 economic profile, and it does have some housing information in there. It's not as detailed as what I think we're gonna have to end up doing, but I was also looking at it thinking, okay, but that was 2018, and this is now, and I mean, it's 4 years. I mean, like, I'm not being dramatic when I say the entire world has changed.
Yes,
in 4 years.
absolutely.
So I wonder, I mean, when I was looking at it, I was reading it thinking, well, this is good information to know, I guess, but is this just history, or is this even relevant? Like, do we have any concept of whether it's relevant or not, or do we need to have that?
It's been a year since I
Housing.
looked
Yeah,
at
I
that
have to look
study.
at it again.
It's been a year since I looked at the study. I mean, any data is relevant because it helps tell us where we're going and what's happened. You know,
All those projects that we would have known about in 18, I mean,
Yeah.
you know.
And it's preference too, I mean, it does represent the city at that time, and those feelings could still be the same, you know, depending who's looking at it.
Yeah, it was interesting looking at the stakeholder surveys and what they had to say about the economic future of this city. And I thought it was interesting reading from a 2018 perspective what they thought about Phoenix Plaza and what impact that was going to have, and about the outlets and the truck stop and that sort of it, because some of it, I think, doesn't accurately reflect what we are now.
Yeah.
I don't think the Phoenix Plaza is a big driver.
Right.
of revenue.
Yeah, and that's what's exciting to me, having worked there a long time, is that, you know, we have multiple projects, you know, I think of like 5 or 6 off the top of my head that are gonna be under construction here in the next 6 to 12 months that are gonna bring employment, like good employment that we haven't seen, you know, in a long time, so.
What's the plan for the outlet mall property?
And the outlet mall, as far as I know, they're gonna be,
So-
they're gonna be investing.
We got that hotel.
yes, they have a hotel that are, you know, hopefully signing the final documents soon. From what we're hearing, the terms give the hotel some time to build longer than we would want them to build, so we may not see opening for over a year, which, I mean, they're motivated, but the contract gives that time from what we're seeing. They're claiming that they're interested in remodeling the whole thing, moving forward. Other staff here is very excited about it. I've seen what the Simon Group has done and how long they've dragged their feet. I wouldn't hold my breath until I see that place redone. Maybe in 10 years, it'll finally be finished and remodeled, but, you know, other management is very excited about them talking about remodeling, but I'm like, it's the Simon Group. Good luck.
It's gonna look really ugly though, if a new brand new hotel goes in, it's like, it's gonna.
My experience with them, again, looking at their places and talking to other cities they've been in, they don't care.
A lot of them look better than ours though.
Yes.
I mean,
The one I used to live next to looked just like ours for a long time. They finally redid it 2 years ago, but I think that they had been saying it would be redone for a longer, you know, a long time.
Getting to us, maybe.
So maybe.
And I appreciate your comments and, you know, like an average instead of saying a blanket over everywhere, because it feels a little reckless like that, honestly. Like it feels like you could get anything, you know, and for preference and business, it's better to have, you know, different areas, you know?
Yeah, I mean, there's always the argument, you know, California and Oregon have already passed a similar law. We haven't really seen how it goes into effect yet because it's still so recent. But even, you know, in California with the ADUs, they made them so easy to build and didn't allow cities to restrict. I don't feel it made a huge difference in the number of ADUs we were seeing. Once ADUs was a concept and they were allowed, I didn't see a big difference from when we could charge impact fees, when we could require a parking garage, when we could require that to the newest laws that they had passed in California that basically said, you can build an ADU out of any structure on your house, it doesn't matter. You know, or you can just build a new ADU, or you can have a junior ADU inside the house, or you know, I didn't see an appreciable difference every year they added new, you know, restrictions from cities, not allowing cities to regulate it more and more. And I don't feel like we got more and more ADUs. So even if we pass this minimum, how many duplexes do I actually think are gonna be built?
There's huge.
One or two? Like, I don't know that your neighborhood isn't going to change even if they allow duplexes, because people, one, either don't have the money to go in and build it, or two, if they do, they might do it inside for their family member anyways, you know, so it's how many people are just investors out here is really the questions that are willing to kick out their renters, tear it down and build something different. That's not very many people who do that. Usually people who do that go and buy properties and do it. It's not, you know, existing established areas usually. So yes, there's a big scare about it, but how much is gonna actually happen from it? I don't know.
When Kirkland said they only got 6 cottages
Originally.
you know, this past year. I mean,
Yeah, they got one this last year, but yeah.
There's tremendous paradigms in the development industry too, so you change something now, and that's not gonna filter through to the way developers actually do things until 20 years from now.
Yeah.
So what's the definition of cottage?
So by our code, we allow 1,200 square feet.
It's a small house.
Oh,
By our
Single family detached, but it's smaller, you know.
So, if you look at missing middle, a lot of time a cottage means that it's around a central courtyard. So it's usually little single families.
The missing middle website, it's just a bunch of
Okay.
houses kind of like.
yeah.
And you get more
Now
density
here
per
with a
acre.
cottage all along the street, you know, we've got some developments, the cottage is just down the street, so it's really just small, single family. But it still meets a similar need.
The idea was, you know, like the John Day Homes, that's the John Day Ranger Station, those are cottages, and then there's cottages development here. The idea was like, it'll be less expensive because it just proportionally is smaller, but they're not really very inexpensive because of the prices of land and materials and everything. Yeah, and they were, when it's only a couple hundred square feet smaller than a single family home, it's the same price basically, so.
What are the new projects that are businesses that are being built here soon?
Yeah, the first one that'll go under construction, as soon as, in the next month or two, as soon as we have, their pre-construction meeting is Seacon. They have a light industrial building, so they don't have a user. That's off 140th. There's another light industrial off of Tanner Road, so where the new roundabout is, just in lumber, that's a large, also light industrial with, you know, both of them have office space in the front and large space in the back. We limit warehousing to 80%, so, you know, the hope and plan is that there's some employment, there's some either packaging or light manufacturing, something like that.
I have a question on that
Yeah.
one. The new roundabout, like, are semi trucks gonna be running on that? Or is there like a new roundabout? They are? Oh,
Yeah.
Interesting. I was driving it the other day and I was trying to
Yeah.
imagine myself in a semi.
Now, semi trucks are not supposed to go through, like, stay on North Penn Way and go
Yeah.
up and down the roundabouts. And yes, they could. I think generally we're still directing towards exit 34, but
Yeah.
another one is the Puget Sound Energy Training Facility. over by Nintendo. That's a big building, that's some employment. And then Biotherapeutics is off of 140th and North Bend Way, where you're going down North Bend Way and go up to 140th, or you can go straight. It's right there in the middle. So kind of across from Tannerwood and the other side 90. So that's a medical device manufacturer.
A little further out in less certain, we've got a proposal for a larger commercial mixed use, with a little bit of residential. Just shy of, well, right where the river gets closest to Tannerwood.
Yeah, we're waiting to be taking a builder.
Yeah, they don't have anyone to do it yet. Are there any other big commercial, we do have Biggs Marine, is coming. There are boat, sales down in Issaquah, and they're gonna build a location up here. We also have more interest in, another, boat storage service, facility place where an Albert Lee appliance is supposed to go off of North Bend Way. We've got the car wash.
The military readiness center, so that's a big one. It's the US for Washington National Guard has an armory in Seattle. It's their big base. And it's too hard for them to get in and out of Seattle with traffic. And so those locals need to move their facility up.
Where are they doing it?
Out by Kirktown. Huge Western property. It's all big vacant land with lots of Scotch fruit right now.
Yeah, I mean, those are.
That's a lot.
Yeah.
We haven't had anything like that in a long time,
No.
it seems like.
And, you know, most of those, besides the last few we mentioned, are like happening. Like I said, 6 to 12 months, you will see construction, you will see them going up. Yeah, so. No more big neighborhoods and, you know, plats and stuff that we're seeing, but yeah.
They left for subdivisions
I
and
don't-
smaller subdivisions.
Yeah, I don't think our floor or whatever the state gives us, I think we all feel like it's because of all the development we've had. You know, it should be scalable to our community, meaning I guess, I don't think they're gonna give us some crazy number that we're like panicked that we're gonna have to go 50 feet and, you know, high-rise housing, we're not that worried. I think we can accommodate what we're given, and especially if it's a floor, and we can build upon that. So it's more, what does the community wanna see density-wise and housing style-wise and where? Is what to think about, you know? So.
Nobody's approached the city about it's like RV storage off the Tanner.
There have been people inquiring about RV storage, you know, where we limit outside storage. It's only allowed in a couple zones.
But right now, it's RV storage. I'm just wondering if.
Oh, you mean redevelopment of those.
Right.
Oh,
Right.
yeah.
Those are very, very profitable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And mini storage.
It's like a barbed wire fence.
Yeah, and mini storage is so popular. Everybody needs like 3 of them in
Yeah.
the community. 3 mini
I know,
storage.
I get it.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's a challenge because there's very little investment you can do for those businesses.
Totally.
You make a lot of money by not doing anything, but it doesn't bring revenue to the city here.
It's definitely not pretty, but.
Yeah, it's a need, yeah,
I understand, I mean.
yeah.
And we actually changed our code to not allow outdoor storage for things that are not associated with individual personal storage. Because we were having a lot of proposals for things like car dealers in the Bellevue area, having a secondary lot out here. That does nothing for the city of North Bend.
Right.
Brings impacts.
We actually had the hay, you know, you see the big hay storage and drying in Ellensburg and stuff on the freeway. We had them coming, you know, from China wanting to just buy land in North Bend to like dry hay, and we're like, no, it's gonna benefit us, or do we want that? So, any other questions?
I just wanna ask, does the city have any land banks, like, that are like developable? Or- No, okay.
We're trying
That
to
makes
set
sense.
aside some money to do some land banking. I've been looking for grants that would allow me to do it, none of them, they'll have to have project.
Yeah.
We can't just buy it. We're looking at different partnerships. We're trying to talk to the county, see if we can start buying some property, to take some land for future affordable housing.
Do we know about, the sewer, when it's gonna be completed? Is there any-
I haven't heard any change from being estimated completion towards the end of next year.
Okay.
Yeah,
On the
we-
land bank issue, we do have two properties the council's considered the past for affordable housing, so the senior center property at Gardner Weeks Park, and then also the parking ride, just east or just west of downtown. So they thought about those in the past, and they come up again. The challenge that they face was,
Something else.
yeah.
Senior center, okay.
Yeah.
Yes,
Mhm.
Yep.
it would.
And maybe senior housing.
Yeah, senior, that's interesting.
The challenge that faces is you have to do a taller building than probably 4 stories to make that pencil, and that was too much.
Yeah. Makes sense.
So the building that potentially is gonna happen next to the park.
Yeah, that's the senior housing, yeah.
Yeah, we haven't heard from them.
Well, that would be a spot that if it doesn't happen in senior housing, just, housing would be a big piece of land, and we do have some other proposals we've seen, pretty early drafty in the downtown, different property owners that have ideas, and, yeah, some multi-unit, they'll be small scale, but you get some of those, and that helps with your numbers and stuff, so.
I mean, personally, I actually think it's, like downtown is a great area to go up, and you can still, step back the height
Yeah.
in relation to the street, so it's a little big, you can still get units in height and.
Yeah, and do you remember the planning commission, did they support in the past more height? And maybe
Yeah.
even provided a recommendation to council, and then council at the time just did not wanna go above, and one of the proposals was like a stair step, we're just behind, we're not at the street, but like over here at the middle of the building, it could go up another 5 or 10 feet. And we do have an allowance for 45 in a small section of our downtown.
Height is a very touchy subject here, though. You guys remember the hotel, we allowed height limits increase there in that zone. And when we were doing that, there was one individual in the community that put out information showing a skyscraper in North Bend.
A little dramatic.
Yeah.
Well, we did get some people coming in wanting to put a 90-foot building in, and we're just like, not even for housing, but for, I think, food storage or something.
That's gonna be hard to sell.
3 times our height.
Yeah. Did council see, it's kind of a generic, outline in planning of like a person scale on the street, and then, have they?
Yeah,
They've
that's
seen-
important.
They've seen those, the problem is when you see those person scales and the setbacks, the buildings are blocks.
Right.
And so all they see is the whole mountain blocked and not what the design of a building is required here with ups and downs to see it. So it actually scared them more than it helped showing here's your view, because it showed a straight line of what the new height would be, even step back. And because it blocked the whole view, because it was in a block, because you don't know what part would be blocked,
Right.
it actually scared them more.
Well, and the other problem was the rendering was very modern, was a very like
Yes.
contemporary modern.
Yeah, but I think a lot of it was the grayed out your side,
Yeah, it just didn't especially with the historic downtown, it looked like if something like that rendering were to be, dropped into downtown North Bend in the historic area, it would just look like an eyesore. It would look horrible, and that's all I thought of when I saw it. It was horrifying to me. And and I get that, I understood that, it's, this high and then this high, and there's
trying to show
already
an
the buildings
outdoor
could be higher than they are.
patio on top and then
Yeah.
step back, and so all you saw was straight line.
It was just the presentation was what killed it, but how it was rendered was
So if we were to go that direction, we have to make sure that we.
We'd have to budget a lot more money to have someone design something
Right.
very specific to the city, and
Right.
that wasn't where we wanted to set.
I think it's the same thing with housing, though, it just shows how important design is to perception. So like with that missing middle height policy, 15 units per acre there, that looks comfortable. So if you show 15 units per acre in garden apartment type homes, with that big walls and
Yeah.
carports and everything, that same density, but it feels different.
Right.
Yeah, and we're getting the Habitat 7 units, but they've been a great partner to work with, and we're like, find some more land, guys, like, they already have a really good system in place. And it's home ownership, which is nice, so we just need more of that, I think, to really get some of this housing options. So.
So if anybody's interested to help with Habitat, I can send you a link to volunteer tomorrow. Jamie and I are gonna actually be over there.
I put my 3-year-old to work.
Yeah.
It's actually very helpful.
Bob the Builder, there you go.
I know.
Not available tomorrow, but do send a link because I would love to do it in the future.
Yeah, I think you can sign up to volunteer almost anytime, we're just going as a city group.
Oh.
Yeah, the last Friday and this Friday, so
That's really cool.
you can, yeah, we can send you the link and you can sign up to, maybe participate.
Yeah,
Volunteer.
I couldn't do it tomorrow, but on the weekend, okay.
Yeah.
Rebecca did it last
I
Friday.
did it last Friday.
Yeah, that's cool.
Okay, all right, so are we ready to conclude?
Yeah, go for it.
All right, at this point of the meeting, let's conclude, and we will adjourn at what time?
7:54.
7:54.
See you when we see you next, yeah.